Ever had your phone die right when you needed to check the weather? Well, medieval farmers never had that problem, mainly because they didn't have phones or electricity or running water. You get the picture. But what they did have was something way cooler. They could read the sky like we read text messages. These farmers were basically walking weather stations, and their forecast accuracy would make some modern meteorologists blush. Take clouds, for instance. While we're busy swiping through weather apps, medieval farmers just had to glance up to know what was coming. Dark, towering clouds meant get inside, now. But it wasn't just about running from rain. They noticed patterns modern science has only recently confirmed. Here's a medieval weather trick that still works today. If you see clouds moving in different directions at different heights like nature's traffic jam, grab an umbrella. Our ancestors figured out that when high and low clouds cross paths, it usually means trouble's brewing. They didn't know about atmospheric pressure or wind shear, but they knew their crops were about to get a good soaking. The sunrise and sunset shows were their primetime weather entertainment. A blood-red sunrise, that was nature's way of saying, hope you like rain, but a red sunset meant tomorrow would be perfect for harvesting. There's actually solid science behind this. Red skies happen when sunlight hits dust particles in the air. In medieval Europe, since weather usually moved from west to east, a red morning meant dust and storms were approaching, while a red evening meant the dust and good weather was heading away. My favorite has to be their moon halo observations. Imagine being a medieval farmer, looking up at night and seeing a perfect ring around the moon. Today, we know these halos form when moonlight hits ice crystals in high-altitude clouds. But back then, it was like nature's early warning system. They noticed that almost every time they saw that glowing ring, rain or snow would follow within 24 hours. That's some seriously reliable forecasting without a single satellite. Speaking of reliability, studies have shown that many of these traditional weather reading methods are accurate about 80 to 85% of the time, which is pretty impressive considering modern local forecasts are right about 90% of the time, and we have computers and radar. It's like they had a supercomputer in their heads, processing countless observations into surprisingly accurate predictions. The medieval farmers had different names for various cloud formations, and some were pretty creative. Those wispy, high-altitude clouds we call cirrus. They called them mare's tails. If you saw these stretched across the sky, you could expect rain within 3 days. And those puffy cotton ball clouds that mean fair weather, they called them weather's eyes, because they seemed to watch over the fields on pleasant days. But maybe the most fascinating thing was how they could predict frost just by studying the evening sky. A crystal clear night with absolutely no clouds meant trouble. All the warmth would escape into space, leading to a frosty morning. Some farmers would stay up late watching the stars, knowing that the clearer and more numerous they appeared, the colder it would get by dawn. They'd use this knowledge to decide whether to cover their sensitive crops or not. The really ingenious part was how they combined all these different sky signs to make their predictions. A red sunset plus straight rising smoke meant tomorrow would definitely be good for working in the fields. But if they saw those signs along with a moon halo, they knew the good weather wouldn't last long. Better get the work done early. And you know what's truly remarkable? Many of these methods are still used today by outdoor enthusiasts and farmers who've kept the old knowledge alive. Some modern farmers even say they trust their sky reading skills more than their weather apps, though they probably check both just to be safe. Speaking of safety, medieval farmers didn't just watch the sky, they had a whole army of four-legged weather predictors right in their farmyard. These animals seemed to have a sixth sense about incoming weather changes, and the farmers learned to pay very close attention to their behavior. Take swallows, for example. These little aerial acrobats weren't just pretty to watch. They were the medieval equivalent of a Doppler radar. When they started flying close to the ground, farmers knew rain was coming. The science behind this is pretty neat. Insects swallow food, fly lower when air pressure drops before a storm because their tiny wings work better in dense, humid air. The swallows were just following their lunch, but to farmers, they were better than any weather vane. Something that would have made a medieval farmer chuckle is how their cows were basically living weather stations. When cows suddenly decided to plop down in the field for no apparent reason, It wasn't because they were feeling lazy, they could sense the dropping air pressure before a storm. Some farmers swore that if the cows were lying down while chewing their cud, you had about 6 hours before the rain started. Talk about precise forecasting. Modern research actually backs this up. Studies show that cows become more restless and change their behavior hours before bad weather hits. Dogs were particularly amusing weather predictors. If you saw a medieval farm dog rolling around in the dirt more than usual, it wasn't having a midlife crisis. It was signaling incoming bad weather. The pressure changes before storms apparently made their joints ache just like your grandpa's knee that knows when it's going to rain, so they'd try to relieve the discomfort by rolling around. Some farmers joked that their dogs were more reliable than their own aching joints for predicting rain. Cats were the drama queens of weather forecasting. When they started sneezing or obsessively washing their ears, medieval farmers knew moisture was increasing in the air. One old farmer's tale claims that if a cat washes its face and paws in the morning, good weather will follow, but if it washes its ears, rain is definitely on the way. Scientists now think cats can detect the slight changes in atmospheric pressure through their inner ears, which might explain why they get extra groomy before storms. But the MVP of medieval weather forecasting were horses. These magnificent creatures could sense approaching storms hours before the first cloud appeared. They become restless, snort more frequently, and sometimes refuse to leave their stables. Recent research has shown that horses can detect changes in barometric pressure as small as 0.1 inches of mercury. That's more sensitive than some modern weather instruments. Some farmers said watching their horses was like having an early warning system. If the usually calm plow horse started acting like it had too much coffee, you knew something was brewing. Many of these animal behaviors are now scientifically proven. Studies show that animals can detect infrasound from approaching storms up to 100 miles away. They can also sense changes in barometric pressure that humans can't perceive. One study even found that farm animals react to earthquakes up to 24 hours before they happen, something medieval farmers had long suspected. Bees were particularly reliable weather forecasters. On a medieval farm, if you saw bees staying close to their hive or becoming aggressive, you could bet your last loaf of bread that rain was coming. Modern research has shown that bees can detect changes in humidity, temperature, and pressure that signal approaching storms. They'll even adjust their nectar-gathering trips based on incoming weather. Talk about smart planning. Scientists have discovered that bees won't leave their hive if there's more than a 50% chance of rain. They're basically living probability calculators. Chickens provided some comic relief in this natural weather station. If they started preening excessively or huddling together, medieval farmers knew bad weather was approaching. One old saying went, "If the rooster crows when he goes to bed, he'll certainly rise with a watery head." Translation: if roosters make a racket at sunset, expect rain by morning. Medieval farmers probably got a kick out of watching their strutting roosters accidentally predict their own soggy futures. Speaking of predictions, pigs were surprisingly good at it too. If you saw pigs gathering straw and carrying it to their sty, you could expect seriously bad weather. They'd also become more vocal and agitated before storms. Research has shown that pigs can sense changes in air pressure so subtle that they occur up to 12 hours before humans notice any weather changes. One medieval farmer reportedly said his pig was more accurate than his wife's aching tooth at predicting rain, though we hope he didn't say that in front of his wife. The really clever medieval farmers learned to cross-reference all these animal behaviors. If the cows were lying down, the cats were washing their ears, and the bees weren't flying, that was practically a guarantee of rain. It was like having a whole committee of weather forecasters right there on the farm. Some modern farmers still swear by these animal observations, combining them with modern weather forecasts for the most accurate predictions. While these animal weather forecasters were incredibly reliable, medieval farmers didn't just rely on their farmyard friends. They also paid close attention to which way the wind was blowing, because wind direction could tell them exactly what kind of weather was heading their way. When the wind blew from the east, farmers would groan louder than their rusty barn doors. An east wind was about as welcome as a fox in the chicken coop. It usually meant trouble was coming. Cold, dry air would sweep in, threatening to damage crops and make everyone miserable. There's actually an old saying that goes, "When the wind is in the east, it's neither good for man nor beast." Turns out our ancestors were onto something. Meteorologists now know that in Europe, easterly winds often bring unstable weather patterns and can drop temperatures by up to 15 degrees in just a few hours. But a south wind? That would get farmers moving faster than a merchant offering free ale. Strong southerly winds meant they had about 48 hours before a storm hit. You'd see them scrambling to harvest whatever was ready and tie down anything that might blow away. Some clever farmers even created makeshift wind meters using branches and leaves. If a south wind could lift a certain size leaf, they knew exactly how long they had before the rain started. Research shows they were remarkably accurate. The size of leaf that would lift in a 20-mile-per-hour south wind usually meant rain within 2 days. But it gets interesting when medieval farmers figured out something that took modern science centuries to confirm. They noticed that when warm winds from the south met cold winds from the north, it almost always meant severe weather was coming. Modern meteorologists called this a frontal system, but medieval farmers just called it time to hide in the cellar. They even had a saying, "When south wind meets north blow, wise men go to their houses." The chimney smoke test was their favorite party trick. Every morning they'd check how the smoke rose from their chimneys. If it shot straight up like an arrow, great weather was ahead. But if it hung around at roof level like a lazy cat, they knew rain was coming. The science behind this is fascinating. Smoke rises better in high pressure is good weather, and getting pushed down in low pressure means stormy weather. Some farmers even claimed they could predict how many hours until rain by how low their smoke hung, though this might have been more about impressing the neighbors than actual forecasting. Some particularly observant farmers even noticed that different types of wood smoke behaved differently. Oak smoke was apparently the most reliable weather predictor. Something about its density made it extra sensitive to air pressure changes. Though I suspect some farmers just used this as an excuse to stock up on their favorite firewood. No, dear, I'm not being picky about the wood. I'm being meteorologically accurate. Wind speed was another big deal. Medieval farmers developed a whole system for measuring wind strength without any fancy equipment. A light breeze that could barely move a leaf meant fair weather would stick around. But if the wind was strong enough to make trees dance, as they called it, changes were definitely coming. They even had specific names for different wind strengths. My favorite is a wind strong enough to make a priest curse. Pretty sure that one didn't make it into modern meteorology textbooks. One particularly clever technique involved watching how dust behaved in the wind. If dust got kicked up but settled quickly, humidity was high and rain was likely. But if the dust stayed airborne longer, dry weather would continue. This observation was so reliable that some farmers would deliberately throw a handful of dirt in the air each morning, probably looking quite strange to anyone passing by. Did you know there's actually solid science behind all this wind watching? Studies have shown that in many parts of Europe, about 70% of weather changes can be predicted just by monitoring wind patterns. That's pretty impressive for people who thought the world was flat. Though to be fair, if you're just doing farm work, the world being round doesn't matter much. Their wind predictions got so specific that they could tell you not just if it would rain, but what kind of rain to expect. A steady wind from the southwest bringing warm air, light, soaking rain, gusty winds shifting direction, short, heavy downpours. Some farmers got so good at this they could plan different tasks for different types of rainy days, though I bet they still complained about the weather just as much as we do. Among all these wind reading techniques, perhaps the most reliable was the combination of wind direction and cloud patterns. When high clouds moved in one direction and surface winds blew another way, medieval farmers knew big changes were coming, a trick that modern meteorologists still use today with their fancy satellite data. Studies show this particular observation is accurate about 85% of the time, which is pretty remarkable for people who had no idea what jet streams were. But winds weren't the only invisible force medieval farmers paid attention to. They also became experts at reading another subtle sign of changing weather, the way the air itself smelled. Well, medieval farmers were basically walking weather stations, and their noses were one of their most trusted tools. Let's dive into how these agricultural experts could smell incoming weather changes with surprising accuracy. First up, that famous rain smell we all know and love. Medieval farmers called it the herald of the clouds because it arrived before the first drops fell. They didn't know the scientific explanation that it's actually bacteria called actinomycetes releasing spores when moisture levels rise, but they knew this smell meant business. get the hay in the barn, cover the grain piles, and maybe grab that medieval equivalent of an umbrella, which was probably just a thick cloak, but hey, it did the job. Medieval farmers were so tuned into these scents that they could actually tell the difference between a short shower and a long storm just by how strong the rain smell was. A light, fresh scent meant a passing shower, while a heavy, intense, earthy smell meant it was time to batten down the hatches for a proper downpour. One old farming journal from the 1300s even mentioned that when the earth breathes deeply, the sky will weep heavily. Pretty poetic for a bunch of practical farmers, right? The impressive part was how they used flowers as natural barometers. When flowers suddenly started smelling extra sweet and strong, farmers knew they were in for some dry weather. This wasn't just some random guess. Flowers actually release more fragrance when the air pressure is high and stable, which typically means clear skies ahead. Medieval farmers would walk through their gardens in the morning, taking deep whiffs of their roses and lavender. If the scent was powerful enough to make their eyes water, they knew it was safe to start the big outdoor jobs. But it wasn't all pleasant aromas. Medieval farmers also paid attention to the not-so-nice smells. A damp, musty smell at night was like a big flashing warning sign saying, "Rain tomorrow." This smell usually showed up when warm, moist air was moving in, creating perfect conditions for tomorrow's rainfall. One particularly grumpy farmer's note from the 1400s complained that when the night air smells like wet sheep's wool, only fools plan to dry their grain. They even noticed how different types of rain had different smells. A warm spring rain smelled different from a cold autumn downpour. Summer storm smell was distinct from a gentle morning drizzle. It's like they had a whole library of weather scents stored in their memory. Some farmers got so good at it that their neighbors would actually come over just to ask, "What's the weather smell saying today?" Here's a fact. Medieval farmers noticed that their manure piles smelled stronger right before it rained. While they probably weren't thrilled about this particular weather indicator, it was actually quite reliable. The lower air pressure before rain caused gases to rise more readily from the decomposing material. So next time someone wrinkles their nose at a farm smell, you can enlighten them about its historical weather predicting importance, though maybe save that conversation for after dinner. And it's really clever how they combine these smell observations with other signs. If they caught that pre-rain smell and noticed their cows getting restless, something we learned about in the previous section, they knew they were definitely in for some wet weather. It was like having a medieval version of multiple weather apps, all giving the same forecast. Speaking of combinations, they also paid attention to how the air smelled when the wind changed direction. An east wind brought its own distinct scent, usually sharp and clean. A south wind had a different character altogether, often carrying the smell of approaching storms. They could literally smell which way the weather was coming from. Medieval farmers even taught their children these weather-smelling skills from an early age. Can you imagine those lessons? "Come here, young Thomas, and smell this patch of dirt. That's what tomorrow's rain feels like." It might sound funny to us now, but these skills were crucial for survival back then. Many of their smell-based predictions were surprisingly accurate. Modern studies have shown that human noses can detect upcoming rain with about 75% accuracy, so these medieval farmers were onto something real. They might not have had fancy weather radar, but they had something just as valuable: generations of experience reading nature's aromatic signals. And speaking of nature's signals, the medieval farmers didn't just stop at smelling the air. They were keen observers of every natural sign around them, especially when it came to how trees and plants behaved before weather changes. It's just like us checking our phones every morning for the weather forecast, and medieval farmers had their own ritual. Instead of swiping screens, they strolled through their gardens and woods, reading nature's own weather app written in leaves and branches. Take pine cones, for example. These little wooden weather stations were more reliable than some modern forecasts, and definitely more reliable than Uncle Bob's knee when it comes to predicting rain. Medieval farmers noticed something fascinating. Pine cones would snap shut tighter than a miser's purse when rain was approaching. The science behind it is pretty cool. Pine cones close up to protect their seeds when humidity rises. But our medieval friends didn't need to know about humidity sensors or plant biology. They just knew that closed cones meant grab your cloak, it's going to rain. Speaking of nature's peculiar behaviors, let's talk about the drama queen of the plant world, the poplar tree. When a storm was brewing, Poplar leaves would flip upside down, showing their pale undersides like a crowd of people throwing their hands up in panic. This wasn't just some random tree tantrum. The leaves were actually responding to rising humidity levels before a storm. One old farming record from 1432 noted, "When the poplar shows its silver, the wise farmer shows his sense and brings in the hay." Not exactly Shakespeare, but it got the point across. Fruit trees were the long-term weather prophets of the medieval world. If apple and pear trees suddenly started ripening their fruit weeks ahead of schedule, farmers knew winter was coming early, and it wasn't going to be gentle. It's like the trees were saying, "Quick, take these apples. Trust me, you're going to need them sooner than you think." Modern science has actually backed this up. Plants can sense environmental changes weeks before humans notice anything different. Recent studies have shown that trees can detect temperature changes as small as 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit and adjust their growth patterns accordingly.